Much of what I have to say about the Petrostate and the nature of the Petrostate you can find in this book at your local bookstore. Alberta is headed towards some phenomenal economic and political turbulence in the next couple of years. And one of the reasons for that is because we have been so blindsided by our obsession with petroleum and petroleum export at the cost of financial common sense and political honesty. And we can see that. I mean, we've all, lived through the summer and heard the stories about the sense of entitlement in the Tory government, the aura of power and corruption. That here's a premier that would build a $1 million penthouse suite for herself, flying all over the world, mostly to promote bitumen. And this is not the first time we've seen a premier arrive with and depart within 2 years of coming into office. So the political volatility in the province is growing. One of our biggest issues here is that we've been ruled by one party for 43 years. But then when you look at other petrostates, you find the same phenomenon. Oil, money, almost helps the party in power to stay in power way beyond any sensible political shelf life. The PRI in Mexico ruled Mexico for 70 years. The Democrats ruled Texas for 90 years. Now the Republicans are on a 30-year roll. So when you look at oil states, you find that this long period of corrupt rule. So what is a petrostate? Terry Lynn Carl, great political scientist in the United States and California, puts it this way: petrostates rely on an unsustainable development trajectory fueled by an inexhaustible resource, in this case bitumen, and the very returns produced by this resource form an implacable barrier to change. So we can talk about our pipelines to export this crap to China or to the Gulf Coast or somewhere else. We've got no other plan. So each and every petrostate has a very distinct dysfunction, but the dysfunction falls into a pattern. And the first, you get addicted to the money, to the revenue. And then this has an effect on your taxation base, and you lower taxes to make everyone feel warm and fuzzy about stuff they should not feel warm and fuzzy about. And you make this phenomenal disconnect between, you break the bond between representation and taxation. You just blow it up. And then your governments go on bin spending. When the money is in, you're spending it. When the money is not there, revenue is down, you're cutting the hell out of everything. There's incredible volatility to government spending. And then you've got this, you're sitting on a pile of hydrocarbons, and suddenly you think that you're the smartest person in the room. When in fact, you're not the smartest person in the room, you're just the luckiest person in the room. And this leads to a fundamental dumbing down of statecraft and governance. Everything in Alberta can be solved either by bullshit, by PR, right? Or we're going to throw a lot of money at it. And that's how we solve problems. And we never solve problems as a result of doing either one of those two things. And then you see, of course, the abuse, the chronic, perpetual abuse of power. So, are we a petrostate? Petrostate, by definition, 20% of your government revenue has to come from oil, from hydrocarbons. In Alberta, we've gone from 18%, now we're up to 30% of government revenue is coming from hydrocarbon production, largely from conventional oil and from bitumen. Just 10 years ago, almost all of our money was coming from natural gas. Huge shift, huge change. So what does it mean to have this revenue stream running your government? Well, it means incredible volatility. Big black line on this graph shows the money coming into Alberta. All of the lines that are sort of hugging parallel in the center there are examples of other provinces like Ontario, Quebec, BC, where you see they have a much more regular revenue stream. Why? Because it's based on the taxation of citizens. It's not based on the taxation of resources. Of course, if we talk about Alberta's tax advantage, we talk about, we boast now about the fact that we've been able to lower taxes because we've got this hydrocarbon revenue, and we no health premiums, no payroll tax, no sales tax, no capital tax, and ad nauseum. And then we have the oil industry comes in and says, hey, isn't this great, guys? Your schools, your roads, 30% of your schools, 30% of your hospitals, 30% of your infrastructure is now being paid by the extraction of hydrocarbons, from revenue from the extraction of hydrocarbons in this province. Isn't that great? And then you're sunk, you're compromised, you're gone. You don't have any choice in this anymore. You never voted for it, but that's what you've got. And the big issue here in Petrostates, if you're not being taxed, you are not being represented. And what does that do to the population? Whether we're talking about people in Nigeria, or whether we're talking about people in Saudi Arabia, or whether we're talking about people in Texas or Alaska or Alberta, is they get incredibly apathetic. Say, why should I be concerned about this? I'm not being taxed. Hydrocarbons are paying for all this crap. And so you have this disengagement of the people living in Petrostates from the reality that they're living in. And then we're saying, hey, we're the wealthiest jurisdiction in Confederation. Why the hell have we been running 5, 6 deficits in a row in this province? Because there's no statecraft. There's no fiscal accountability. We're just your typical Petrostate. So here's what we do, when the money comes in, we're like a bunch of university students on a Friday night. And when the money's not coming in, we're doing something else. And we've got a big problem now. Our revenue stream is going down. The more extreme our hydrocarbons become, the less revenue is being generated by them. And also there's a whole bunch of issues here. No, we're not collecting our fair share, obviously, either. But revenue stream, it peaked in 2005, 2006. And here's the other issue associated with this decline in revenue. All right, Lockheed thought we should be getting 40% of the revenue, 40% of the profits generated by hydrocarbons. That was his target. Klein brought those targets down to 20 to 30%. What's the current target? 15%. We're giving this stuff away. We're not getting rich. The multinationals exploiting this resource, Statoil from Norway, or Sinopec, state-owned corporation from China, they're getting rich. But not Albertans, who own the resource. Here's an example. The Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, Norway, companies receive 22% of the net revenue of the profits. And they're happy getting that in the North Sea. Exxon, all those boys, they're all there. Chevron, they're all big players in the North Sea. They're not complaining. In Alberta, what do companies get? 53 friggin' percent. Norway's got a fund. They're thinking about the future. They're thinking about their children. We're not. They've got nearly $1 trillion saved. If we had behaved like Norway or Alaska, if we'd behaved like Alaska, followed Alaska's rules, saved 25%, we'd have $42 billion. If we followed the Heritage Fund rules that Lockheed set up, we'd have a $50 billion fund right now. If we followed Norway's rules, 80% of your revenue going in here, you'd have $121 billion. So what's the Heritage Fund worth today? $17 billion. That $17 billion isn't even enough to clean up the existing liability of the tailings ponds and the oil sands. Nor is it enough money to clean up all of the orphaned and abandoned well sites and pipelines and gas plants in this province, which is a liability worth nearly $30 billion. So what's the consequence then of living in a petrostate that operates this way? You see this phenomenal disengagement of the citizenry from political life. If you're not being taxed, you will not be represented. And 60% of us no longer vote, keeping this whole sordid affair going. We're so disengaged, we don't give a damn. That's because too many people here in Alberta aren't here to make a living, they're here to make a killing. They don't give a goddamn about this place in the end. They're here to make a killing and then they're getting the hell out. And this leads then to our Keystone Cops government. They can't manage anything. few examples. Corporate taxes. Here's the latest Auditor General's report. Great. Revenues from corporate income taxes have increased over the last 3 years. The amount the corporations owe in overdue taxes, penalties, and interest has increased even more. Well, that's a good sign of a competent government, on the ball. Thank you very much. Here's another example of the kind of rampant conflict of interest. I mean, we all know about Alison Redford, but here, we've got the Alberta Energy Rate Regulator. It's supposed to be the top-notch, world-class regulator for energy in the world. And who runs it? The goddamn industry runs it. Gerald Proddy, the founder of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, the largest oil lobbying group in Canada, runs our regulator. Press doesn't have any problem with this kind of conflict of interest. Most Albertans don't have any kind of problem with this kind of raw conflict of interest. There's no other countries now look at us and say, well, what kind of petrostate is that? How compromised are you as a people? Auditor General, Joint Canada Alberta Oil Sands Monitoring, where are we? Well, here's the recent findings about the annual report was released 15 months after the year ended. Yeah, that's kind of like how we run our hospitals and healthcare. The report lacked information on overall status of implementation, status of key commitments and individual projects was not clear, key information was missing, and on it goes. Classic incompetence. All tied to this resource, which is running the province at this point in time. And, we hear every day, if we don't build these pipelines, if we don't get this stuff off to China, then Alberta's going to go to hell. We never hear any discuss about, hey, what about this commodity? This commodity is the most volatile commodity in the world. You tie your economy and your politics and everything in your province to this commodity, you're going to look like a yo-yo. You're going to go up and down. I mean, oil prices are now dropping. Nobody was predicting that. We're down to 80 bucks. There are a lot of oil sands projects that are not economic at 80 bucks a barrel. And we forget to add that this is the world's most expensive oil. So when you have this kind of volatility and when prices really drop, what's going to be the projects first affected? It will be bitumen. Because you only need $1 billion to put 1 million barrels of oil on the market in the Middle East. But in Alberta, you need, $35 to $45 billion to get 1 million barrels flowing. And that's not even including the upgrading. Then we've got this carbon problem. Nobody wants to talk about that in Alberta. We're like kids in the playground. We just don't want to be mature. This is not an issue. It's kind of like sex. We're not going to talk about it. Carbon, it's a dirty subject, And 17% greater footprint than conventional oil. That's an issue. That's a big friggin' issue. It's a big problem. Go to the North Sea. Get an example of what kind of CO2 is coming from the North Sea associated with oil production there. 9 kilograms to 18 kilograms. In Alberta, for our in-situ projects, for our steam plants, everywhere from 22 kilograms to 417 kilograms per barrel. And there's no program to encourage 22 kilograms. 417 kilograms is okay in Alberta. And then we have a so-called climate change strategy. Oh, don't worry, we're going to get, we'll hit 50 million tons and then we're going to get it down, And we came up with this strategy in 2008. And everyone then knew that, well, this is bullshit. The province is not going to do this. The Auditor General has now confirmed it indeed was frozen horse manure. And there's no evidence of regular monitoring. There's no clear link between implementation plan and monitoring and reporting. The strategy, the department has no clear guidance or effective monitoring to ensure strategy review. Give me a break. More negligence in the Petrostate. And of course, in-situ production is that much more carbon intensive because it uses 4 times as much natural gas. And there are other issues with the steam plant production, such as blowing stuff up. Then we have, the carbon issue again. We have other companies and around the world saying, this is a big issue. 80% of all fossil fuel should stay in the ground if we want to avoid the worst form of climate destabilization, the worst form of climate volatility, where we essentially blow up the global economy and civilization as we know it. Even the Hong Kong Bank, which is my bank, and which I can add, you know, is the proud bank of many drug cartels in Mexico, is saying, look, you know, this is a big issue. A lot of this stuff is unburnable, and capital-intensive, high-cost projects such as heavy oil and oil sands are most at risk under our scenario. You never hear our government talking about this. But you know what? Jane will tell you people in Nebraska are talking about this. And here's the thing our governments have never planned for, never prepared for, never talked about. Well, what if demand for oil in the United States dwindles and Americans start driving less, as they have? And what if the Americans started to produce more oils, which is they have from the Bakken in North Dakota, and also from shale reserves in Texas? Well, nobody prepared for that. So then, if that is all happening, why do you need Gateway and why do you need Keystone? Well, you need it because you need to get this stuff to export markets, because there's no longer any growth in the domestic market for this product. So you become fixated on pipelines. And what if none of these pipelines get built? Well, production in the tar sands stays static, around 3 million barrels a day. And that's probably exactly where it should be, and it should not grow. And then it should be on its way out. So what's the whole deal about getting stuff to export? You've got refineries in the US Gulf Coast, all under capacity. They need some heavy oil so that they can refine the gasoline, produce some jet fuel, whatever, put it on tankers. It's legal in the United States for the US to export petroleum products. Their export of petroleum products has increased from 1 million to nearly 3 million barrels a day, thanks in part to bitumen exports to the Gulf Coast by railway car. So we're in big trouble. There's a lot of stuff that's going to happen, and we're not prepared for it. And we never prepared for it. We should have had a program like South Australia, where we said, okay, 25% of all of our energy needs are going to come from renewables by 2025. By 2050, the goal is to have about 50% coming from renewables. In Australia, solar is become remarkably popular. More than 1,000 people have solar panels like this on top of their roofs. Cost $8,600 to install, and within 6 years they paid off the whole thing. And then they have another 20 years where they can actually earn money by putting this power on the grid. That kind of thinking could have happened here, but has been suppressed by the folks that want to export hydrocarbons. So where do we go? We start by doing what's necessary, then doing what's possible, and suddenly you're doing the impossible. If you want to see this province change, you're going to have to change its fiscal regime. And you're going to have to get creative about how you resist the extraordinary power welded by the one-party state and its companions in the oil and gas business. And that means Albertans organizing on a scale they have not yet imagined or thought possible. It means slowing down. It means collecting our fair share. It means saving money for the future. It means behaving like an owner. It means cleaning up the mess and not cleaning up our rhetoric. And it means adding value to the resource. And it means dealing with the carbon issue. And we are nowhere near there. We need representative taxation. So we need to run this province on taxes, not on hydrocarbon revenue. We need a sales tax. We need better corporate taxes. We need higher income taxes. And we need carbon taxes. And only then, when we do those things, when we make those fundamental political reforms, will we see any investments in renewables or in fighting climate change. We need to do this. Everyone needs to do this. All the money needs to be taken off the table. Not a cent should be used to run the government of Alberta. Save for future generations. So we all want progress, but if you're on the wrong road, progress means doing an about turn and walking back to the right road. In that case, the man or woman who turns back soonest is the most progressive. And I can tell you right now, a lot of those people are living in Nebraska. Thank you.